Happy St. Patrick's Day, and welcome to our 5th edition of Who Knew? Today, resident Joan Murphy will interview resident Al Reiners, who will share his experiences as pastor of St. George's Mission Church in Kotzebue, Alaska. Lucky for us, Al's wife Joanne is also joining us to help share the stories of their Alaskan adventure. In the 1950s, Al and Joanne lived among the indigenous Inuit Eskimos of northwest Alaska, above the Arctic Circle, in a coastal settlement where the sun did not set in the summer, winter temperatures averaged -10 degrees, and snowfall averaged 5+ feet. Like the Eskimos, they had no running water or central heating. Al and Joanne's experiences will give us a new appreciation of Native peoples and spring. I'm excited to announce that in addition to airing today's program live on TV 970, we also have a live audience. Hooray! During this interview, if any of our TV viewers have questions, please call extension 6319. Jessica Corbett will be answering the phone and relaying the questions to me via text. At the end of the interview, all questions will be answered, and I'll ask everyone in the audience to hold your questions until the end as well. So, without further ado, I will turn it over.
Thank you, Whitney. Before we start our conversation with Joanne and Al, I would like to set the context for their experiences because there are a few things that are a little different from the usual here. As many of you know, Alaska was purchased by the United States from the Russian Empire in 1867. Russia had carried on trade in that Arctic region. One of the established trading towns was Kotzebue. It is a coastal settlement 30 miles above the Arctic Circle on the northwest coast of Alaska. Over 100 years, the area has changed uses, and for example, the United States has established a small military base there. But throughout the various changes that were wrought in Kotzebue and in Alaska generally, the native people in coastal Kotzebue maintained their traditions and their values. We call these people Eskimos, but they probably prefer to be called by their name in their own language, which is either Inupiat, I-N-U-P-I-A-T, or Inuit, I-N-U-I-T. Usually in our conversation today, we're going to be referring to them as Inuit people. Their communal and subsistence way of life has persisted for thousands of years. The Inuit have been Christianized by various missionaries over the years. The Episcopal Church, for example, has had missions throughout Alaska for many years. Interestingly, the Episcopal Church in Virginia has had an abiding connection with Alaska for many years. Reverend William Gordon of Spray, Virginia, which is in Henry County near Ridgway, was a missionary priest in coastal Point Hope, which is north of Kotzebue. He started there in 1943. Also, Bishop Frederick Goodwin of the Virginia Diocese visited Alaska in 1947. And then in 1948, Reverend William Gordon, who was from Virginia, was consecrated Bishop of Alaska. At the time, he was the youngest bishop in the Anglican Union, which included all of the Commonwealth countries. Bishop Bill Gordon, in fact, became quite a celebrity, not only because of his youth, but because he was really quite an inventive pastor and bishop. To better serve his flock, he bought a small airplane and became a bush pilot in order to visit the 27 mission churches he was responsible for in Alaska. In 1951, the Episcopal Church made a series of missionary movies. Flying Bill Gordon's work featured prominently in those movies, of course, and even TV carried them. He was very eager to serve the native people, and he was especially eager to ordain from their communities, from their own communities, to develop a native clergy. He was one of the first bishops also to offer summer jobs in Alaska to seminarians from the lower 48 states. In the mid-50s, Al Reiners had just finished his tour with the Navy, and he was in the seminary, and he sprang for one of those summer jobs. We have his reminiscence, his written reminiscence of how he started. He said, 3 of us seminarians from Virginia arrived in June. We had seen the film about Alaska, and the bishop had written to us that we could each be assigned a village. I was hoping for one along a river with tall pine trees, picturesque log cabins. We were all kidding about who was going to have to go up to cold Eskimo land and get all the blubber. The bishop greeted us at the airplane and said, right off, Al, you'll be going right to Kotzebue with that bush pilot over there across the field. The other 2 kind of nudged each other and winked and said, he gets all the blubber. He says, my first couple of weeks in Kotzebue were the absolute pits. Now, fortunately, he survived and is here to tell us what happened from that point on when you landed in Kotzebue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It was such a different place I'd never seen before. No trees, a lot of empty oil barrels laying around, and I was miserable, but I had a service the first Sunday, and things began to change a little bit because coming out of during the service, the congregation sang a cappella, didn't have an organ, and coming out of church, one person said, I'll take you to get some water. Another person said, I can do some wash for you. Another one said that they would, when they baked bread, they'd bring me some bread. And I thought, gee, these people are okay. And so that the bishop had told me I should look up a woman named Norma Rich, and she would help me get started, one of the lay people there. I found out that she was summer camping 5 miles from the center of the village. So I walked 5 miles and found her tent and everything, and she had 6 children, and they were all having a good time, and she invited me to stay for lunch, which I did. I think we had some kind of caribou stew, and it was very good. And then her husband took me back to the village on his motorcycle. So things were beginning to look up.
Now, you were there in June.
Mm-hmm.
What was the temperature in June?
It was in the 60s. At night it might be down, well, I don't think it ever got much below 60, but it never got much above 60 either. And the days were 24 hours.
24-hour sunlight.
Yeah.
Now, the constant sunlight begins when, in June or July?
Late May, early June, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then how long does it last? All summer?
All summer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in Fairbanks, they always had a midnight baseball game.
Things just went round the clock.
Right, yeah. It was on the 4th of July they'd have that.
Now, did you usually walk out of town to minister to people, distances of 5 miles or
No,
3
that
miles?
was no, that was my one 5-mile walk, but I walked all around the village to visit people and get to know them. And I really began to like them. I thought, gee, these are wonderful people. And by the end of the summer, I just loved them all. And when the bishop wrote me in the fall and asked if I'd like to come back to Alaska after graduation from seminary, I asked my bishop, who was Bishop Goodwin, and he said, well, yeah, I've been up there, and my son flies an airplane up there. Go right ahead. So when I graduated from seminary, I went back up there.
What was your housing like?
Small.
Really
yeah,
small.
It was about the size of a one-car garage. And no plumbing, no running water. It was not very far from an Army Signal Corps base, just one man and his family. And he ran a wire from his electric generator to our little cottage, so we had electric lights. But we still had to bring in water by the bucketful and take it out by the bucketful.
And when you went there now, you were not married.
No.
And Joanne arrived, within a year or something like that?
Well, yeah. When I finished seminary, I went to an outgoing missionaries conference in Connecticut. And I was to orient us and do a lot of detailed planning. And Joanne was on the staff. She worked for the headquarters of the Episcopal Church at that point in New York. And we saw each other a lot, and the conference was for about 10 days, so we dated on the weekend. And, well, before I left, I said, would you like to marry me?
And go to Alaska.
And she was so surprised, she didn't answer me right away, but the next night she said, yes, I will.
Joanne, I've read a story. I read a story in a biography about Bishop Gordon that said that when you were going to Alaska, you spoke with the wife of Bishop Bentley to ask her what Alaska was like. Do you remember if she gave you any tips about Alaska?
Yes, she did. She said, I cried when I left, and I cried when I went, and I cried every day.
In between?
In between.
Did
I? Yes.
It was that wonderful.
It was that wonderful. Yes, they didn't have any children, and I wasn't surprised because Bishop Bentley had a dog team of maybe 8 or 10 dogs, and he drove the dog team to his villages for visits. And up there, everybody except us had a dog team. And it was not unusual to meet someone on a dog team when you were on the trail. One day, the senior bishop, whose name I can't remember because it was...
Bishop Rowe. Bishop Rowe.
Bishop Rowe was coming home this way, and he met what they called a cheechaka going this way. And Bishop Rowe said to the gentleman, how's the trail your way? Whereupon he ushered a stream of cuss words. And when he got through, he said, what about you, Bishop? And he said, about the same.
Now, when they say trails, what are they talking about?
Well,
what's a trail? What is a trail?
Yeah, I never found out who made them. Did you ever?
Well, it was just usage.
Yeah.
The trail was just a pathway in the snow, and it was good for dog sleds with a dog team of 8 or 10 dogs. And
So if you had a team and you traveled, you knew the routes
yeah,
that were usable.
and there was snow from about October until early May, or maybe a little later, depending.
Light snow, or powdery snow, or icy snow. What?
It was powdery. It was powdery because it was so cold. In fact, I was in Fairbanks one time during the winter, and another clergyman was driving down a snow-covered road, and he came to a curve and never slowed down, and he didn't slip either. And I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "When it's this cold, the snow is not very slippery." So you learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to take short steps, too. I noticed the Eskimos took short steps all the time, and I didn't understand that until the winter came, and I realized they did that so they wouldn't slip and fall down. You take short steps. You take long strides, your feet go out from under you, and
But
you're
you
liable
had
to fall down.
you had special shoes called mucklucks.
Yeah.
And before I got there, Al made arrangements with some of the women to make me a fur parkie, came down to my knees, and a pair of mucklucks. And if I tried to save it, it would have just frittered away. But it was a wonderful, wonderful, warm jacket.
Yeah.
And when the wind blew, there was a ruffle around the hood of wolverine. And as you were walking, and it was blowing hard, you take the ruff and turn it towards your face so that it kept your face from freezing. So I was all dressed to move and walk and slip and slide. And that's another story later, but it comes later. I'll tack that on.
You're going
But
to
it was
tempt us.
it was wonderful to have a uniform like everybody else. And there was something in the Eskimos that was so proud when you did something or wore something that they had made and that they prided. And so I wore it until I left.
And when you went there, Al, you did not have any of this special clothing, did you?
No. No.
How did you?
Well,
can you buy this stuff, or how do you get equipped?
Somehow, when I came back after seminary, the bishop had a hunk of fur that he gave me that some of the natives made into a nice fur jacket, and they made me muckluck boots to wear, which had sealskin bottoms, and you put a pad in, and then skin from your ankles all up to your knees, keep you warm. And of course, you have long underwear
and
a fur jacket.
And I remember one time I met you on the walk outside, and I said to you, "Oh boy, it's really cold," and you just smiled and looked at me and said, "Well, you really have to be dressed for it."
That's true.
I gather the temperature was so. Was it the temperature and the wind that was so biting? I gather that the danger of things freezing on you was great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the rough, everybody's parking had a rough like mine. It wasn't original. Mm-hmm. But when you turned it towards your face, you protected your nose. And when you got inside, you took those clothes off immediately so that the next time you went out, you had to get dressed all over again. So they made beautiful things, and were very proud. And so was I.
Excuse me. I looked in the paper this morning at the weather page, and today the temperature in Fairbanks, Alaska is 9 below zero. Mm. We had our first snow on the 1st of October, and it was there until about May.
Kotzebue is north of Fairbanks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's only about 100 miles from Nome,
Right.
as I have
Right.
looked at the map.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you were way up there.
Yeah.
Now the dogs, these sled dogs, did they stay inside? Did they have barns for them?
No, they stayed outside.
Yeah, they gathered around.
They were used to it. and of course, people had dog teams for a lot of reasons, and that meant they could
but they had to hunt.
Go hunting with them. And
they had to hunt to feed them, so it was not a luxury. It was hard work.
Yeah.
And sometimes in the middle of the night, they'd howl. And it was, at first, very scary, but...
They howl when the northern lights appeared in the sky. That would get all the dogs to howling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The northern lights frightened the dogs.
I don't know whether they frightened them or they just were, I guess it was fright, yeah.
Or maybe they were happy. I don't know.
That must have been quite a sight to see the northern lights from that at that latitude.
Yeah, yeah.
Very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, when in the house that you had, was it a special house? Since you were the pastor of the town, were you accorded a special house?
No. In fact, when I got there, the bishop had rented this little house about the size of a one-car garage, and it was empty. I borrowed a cot from somebody in the village, and I brought a sleeping bag, but I didn't have any chairs or table or anything. So it's primitive living. There was a store in town in Kotzebue, a general store, which sold tools and a little bit of clothing and some groceries. And they even had a little tiny restaurant where you could get a meal. So and the bishop gave me a little bit of money when I got there. And so I used that.
To buy a chair.
Yeah.
Were you ordained in Kotzebue?
Yes, I was ordained a priest in Kotzebue on February 25th, I think it was.
Big celebration?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Joanne and the wife of the priest from Point Hope, they'd come for the service, and the two of them helped decorate and organize the National Guard building for the service.
I think we have a picture of that. Could you show picture number 1? I think that's a picture from your ordination. Mm-hmm. And I think it's appropriate because there's a picture of a soldier in the background.
Yeah, hanging on the wall. Yeah.
In the National Guard Armory.
Right.
Hanging on the wall.
Right. Yeah.
And could we, if we might, also see picture number 2, which is also from your ordination.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this shows what?
Oh, that's when the bishop took us to a meal in Rotman's store.
A celebrated meal.
A celebratory banquet.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I noticed there are hammers and drills and
Yeah.
all sorts of hardware hanging on the wall.
Right.
Was it a hardware store or something?
No, it was
like
a
that?
general store that sold hardware and supplies and food and everything.
So the person at the head of the table is Bishop Gordon?
Yes.
Bill Gordon? Flying
Yeah.
Bill Gordon?
Yeah.
Flying Bill Gordon.
Uh-huh.
And this person is at Point Hope, which is north of where we lived and very remote. He and his wife were there for quite a while. It was started by a doctor, Dr. Driggs. And when he gathered the people together, he said, "There is a God and he loves you." And that was his first sermon. I never met him.
But I understand that one of the really notable things about Bishop Flying Bill Gordon was that he just expected that was the message you would give. He did not expect you to change these people or to make them adhere to a lot of ceremonies and things like that. The message was, God loves you and he cares.
Yeah, right.
And so, was that the only instruction you had?
Yeah, he said, I want you to have 3 services a week, 2 on Sunday, Sunday morning and Sunday evening, and 1 in the middle of the week when it's convenient for the people, and be with the people and play with the children. Those are my instructions. That's a good outline of ministry, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And when you had services, how would they be organized? You had a church?
Well, yeah, we finally got a building, and there was a relative of the bishop's who lived in Richmond, I guess, and she sent some money to help us buy lumber and furnish a church, and so the men in the church got some lumber and built benches and an altar and all kind of needed things, so that we had a little church building, and it wasn't very big, but
And Al played the organ.
only in evening prayer. Yeah. I told him I'd play the organ in evening prayer. We'd have a hymn sing if nobody will laugh.
And nobody laughed and everybody sang.
That's right.
Everybody
Great.
sang.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
One of the amusing things and kind of scary was that the people loved to have feasts. And when the bishop came, they just outdid themselves. And they would just, like we would for company. And everybody brought the dish they made it in to the feast. And we'd sit on the floor and use the stool that we knelt on, we'd use to eat off of.
as the table.
Right. And I can't remember why I did this, but I did. I didn't know what to make, and I really was afraid to eat some of the food. Well, as a matter of fact, I was pregnant. So I made a great big, a baby, what do you call them? You used to give the baby a bath in enamel, and I made a great big thing of Jell-O. It was They just thought it was so funny. Because when I tried some of their food, they didn't do this, but that's what they went to watch me while I tasted it. And it was always the same. I could not eat it. It was, but it was a very wonderful event, and everybody did the very best they could to help everybody else. But I never made Jell-O again.
I understand they have a version of ice cream that they make, and I haven't really determined what all is in it, but it involves something involving whale fat.
Yeah.
And it's called Nuk Nuk or something like that.
Yeah.
And they like it.
Yes.
But it's essentially whale fat.
Yeah. It was their dessert. Yeah. Well, see, I thought that the Jell-O would work, but they weren't.
Didn't like it. Now, their diet, the Inuit diet is basically fish.
Yeah.
And
Caribou.
caribou.
Yeah. Yeah, they got a fish up there. It's really a white salmon. They call it she-fish, and they catch them and since there's no they don't have refrigerators, they don't need them in the wintertime, but in the summertime they'll cut the fish and hang it on a rack outside to keep it, and
Try it.
and then when they need it, they get.
So each house has a rack, or are these communal racks?
But
No, each family has
everybody
their own rack.
knew their rack.
And their fish.
Yeah, it was on the shore.
Yeah.
So you look around and there would be pieces, but everybody knew where their. And they were, of course. But she fished in the winter. They would cut a hole in the ice, and they would do what they called jigging. And they had a rope.
A line, yeah.
Yeah, and they
Put a hook
bounce
on
it up and down, and then they pull it out, and the fish would come out just the way it was underneath in the ice, and it would be bent or the way the ice hit it. And
Instantly frozen.
instantly frozen.
Wow.
And we ate a lot of it.
Yeah.
It was, as Al said, like salmon only. I don't know if they thought it was like salmon, but we thought it was like salmon. And we would cut pieces and cook them on its side. I can't remember what we must have put flavor in it. But anyway, it was white, and it was delicious.
Yeah.
Now, what did you cook on? Did you have a stove?
We had a cook stove, big cook stove, and it heated the kitchen.
But it wouldn't have been wood because there wasn't wood in the area.
Right.
Well, how was it fueled?
Oil, yeah.
Well, the kitchen was warm, which leads me to my next story. Al's parents sent, oh, wait a minute. I mentioned earlier I was going to have a baby. I'm back to that. They sent a thing by ship to us for the coming baby, and it was like, I used to know what they were called, but I don't remember now, but it was flat. And when the baby came, we kept that in the kitchen against the wall so we could be with her every minute. And she was close, warm, and I think there was another, oh yes, and I could feed her. Anyway, she was a very lovely baby, was born, And she wasn't, I don't remember now how old she was, but not very. And she got sick.
She had whooping cough.
And she got the whooping cough. We didn't know it was whooping cough because
You were new parents.
we never had a baby before. But anyway, we sort of, I can't remember, we did whatever we could. And the local nurse who flew from village to village and communicated on radio, her name was Esther Schabel, and she was a great tall lady. And when Elizabeth got the whooping cough, Esther had come back to the village, and she came by to see us, and she said, "I hear the baby's sick." And I let go and cried and carried on, and she just sat there very calmly, and Elizabeth was on the little table that Al's parents sent.
Sarah was.
Sarah.
Sarah
Who did I say?
You said Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the nurse and Sarah is the child.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Esther just sat. She said, "Let's just sit and put the coffee on." And I'm just, and finally the baby pulled the little trick she had with the whooping cough and started strangling on whatever was wrong. So Esther went over to her, took a piece of linen or something, put the baby in her arms, held her upside down, and pulled the mucus out of her mouth. And of course, I didn't know what that was all about because we didn't do that, because we didn't know, and if we knew, I probably wouldn't have, because my mother was a nurse, and I would not have tried that. Anyway, so she said, okay, so she sat down, and we had the coffee, and after a while, I thought, I've got to find out what she thinks. But my mother always said that sometimes doctors didn't want you to diagnose. True? Anyway, and I thought, so she's not going to do that. So I said, "Esther, what would you do if that was your baby?" And she said, "I'd be on a plane quicker than, just get on and go. Take her to the hospital."
In Fairbanks.
In Fairbanks. So when we got on the plane and the pilot got on the plane, he came from his seat in the front back, and he said, "What's wrong with the baby?" And we told him. And so I don't know how to describe it, like a tube from where he sat to where the baby sat.
It was oxygen. It was oxygen.
Oxygen, very important. So the pilot said, "You're all set. We've got this, and if she starts, we'll help you." So the baby fell asleep, and she slept till we got to Fairbanks. And we went to the hospital, and some of the folks who worked there said, "Well, you were just here last week or a couple of days ago." And so of course, started crying, carrying on. And the doctor had nothing to do with the baby, but he was a doctor. He was an MD, and he took care of her. And they put her in a tent, and a nurse, and they took care of her all that week. And we got back to the village, and she was fine. And
you might know that baby. Her name is Sarah Martinstein.
And she lives in Richmond now.
Yeah.
Whitney, could we have picture number 7?
I think that's the whale, is it?
Yes, we're going to, I hope we have a picture of you all together with Sarah.
Oh.
We're giving y'all a sneak peek.
Not yet.
Oh, that's...
Yeah.
There she is in the
There she
white
is.
arky.
So the family was reunited. You know, I looked up, I was so impressed with this idea of your being in this town where things were so primitive with a week-old baby who had the whooping cough, that I looked up the distance to Fairbanks, and it's 442 miles by plane, but 741 by road if you could drive. And according to the computer, if one were to drive from Kotzebue to Fairbanks, it would take 85 hours and 39 minutes. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing you had a plane available.
Nobody drove in those days from Kotzebue to Fairbanks.
Yeah.
Did anyone drive from Kotzebue anywhere else?
Not very far. There was only, I think there was 1 or 2 pickup trucks in the village, and that was about it.
The airline owned them.
So the only way to get in and out was either by air or
Yeah.
by sea.
Yeah.
And when she got sick, my last story, the night that we decided to fly, but the plane couldn't land because of the snow and the wind. So we put her back to bed. And the next night, we were still just exhausted. And some of the school teachers, a family, a father, mother, and 2 little girls, and the parents took turns sitting with Elizabeth overnight. Sarah.
That's great.
Elizabeth's her daughter. Anyway, it was...
Wonderful to have that help.
It was, yes, and to know that they knew what to do. It wasn't just somebody passing by saying, oh, well, I'll spend the night. No, these were seasoned parents, and I'll never forget them. I'll never forget them.
Now, you told me a story about being, another one, when you were pregnant. You were on the shore watching a whaling expedition, and you were eating crackers or something.
Crackers and O. Henry candy bars, because I was pregnant, and watching him get into what they called a canoe to go with a bunch of men to hunt a whale that they had spied far away. And I was terrified because...
I'm sure you were.
Well, I thought, maybe he shouldn't have done that. But they made it. He made it. And...
That must have been quite an honor to have been invited to go on a whale hunt.
To let you...
invited by the Inuit people.
Yeah.
Must have been quite an honor.
This boat she's talking about, they had made the boat using a combination of driftwood and whale bones for a frame, and then they covered it with skin from seals probably, and it would hold 8 men. 6 of us were rowers or paddlers, and then there was one in the stern, and one in the bow. The one in the bow was telling us where to go, because he could see. The one in the stern was making us go that way. and we had both paddles and whale and oars, and used the paddles for speed, chasing where a whale was going to come up. And if you caught the whale, then you use the oars for power. You get back to the shore, or if there was ice still, to where the ice was. And I was with a crew that sighted a whale. We didn't get it, but another crew got the whale. And when they get a whale, everybody available helps pull it up on the ice. And they have a butcher's chart for the whale, so that everybody in the village gets part of that whale. And the butcher's chart tells you who gets it. Like the crew that got it initially get one of the choice parts, but everybody else in the village gets part of that whale. And I noticed a young boy, teenager, probably 5'6" or so, hauling away the jaw of that whale. And I thought, that boy could lie down on the tongue of that whale and have space left over. That's how big a whale is.
Yeah, I read that the Inuit, and you correct me on this, the Inuit like to hunt bowhead whales, which are several tons.
Yeah.
It's like they're like the size of an 18-wheeler.
Yeah.
And they're 1/3 of the whale is head, and this massive head, and then a lot of meat and a very thick fat, a lot of fat between the skin and the meat.
Yeah.
And
Blubber.
so, yeah, the blubber. So you're going out in this little skin boat, which I guess is what, like 30 feet long?
Something like that, yeah.
And to go after this thing that's the size of an 18-wheeler and moving. And is there ice around? I'm sure there's ice in the water.
There wasn't much ice in the water, but it was on the edges where the ice was. And
So you've done that?
No, I read about it.
Oh, it sounded like you'd been there.
Well, because I'm reading whaling stories.
the man
Correct.
had a
Harpoon?
a harpoon, yeah. And if he got close enough to the whale, he would harpoon that whale. And some of them had some that would go off in the inside, and that would kill the whale. And then you'd tow it to the shore or to the ice edge, and
Great celebration.
get a lot of men to help haul it up on the ice where you would butcher it.
Whitney, could we look at picture number 3? We're going through a few of them.
There it is. Yeah.
That's the way they carve the whale.
Yeah.
And hauled it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then could we also look at, picture number 3. This one's number 4, I think, if we could look at 3.
That's the boat.
That's the boat, and that's a bone from the whale.
Yeah.
Now, they use the whale bones as well as the meat?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Used
they
everything.
they build things with whale bones, yeah.
Oh, because there's no wood. They use the whale bones instead of
Right,
wood.
Right.
And then you said, Joanne, that there's great celebration. If we could look at pictures number 5 and picture number 6, and maybe you would tell us about those.
Whoopie-doo. Yeah,
That's an Eskimo dance.
they're dancing.
They have drums that they made. It's just a big thing about this big around with skin on it. and they beat that and hum, like a chant almost. And some of the people dance. Quite a sight.
Must be.
And the airline would have them, the airline that flew into Kotzebue would get some of them, if they were having overnight passengers, they'd get them to put on an Eskimo dance for the passengers to see.
There's a blanket toss picture. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Well, that originated to sight things in whales and
They used to do that so that they could spot a whale out in the ocean, and they'd come down and go get it.
But they're not using a blanket, are they?
Oh
no,
yeah,
it's animal skins that they sew
Like a
together.
walrus skin or something like that?
And they just,
And they flip you up, yeah.
and then
But then
the
they
person,
sometimes use it for sport. But the origin was to throw somebody in the air to look for a whale.
and when the bishop did it, they
They loved it.
they howled even louder because he was a great favorite. And I thought he was a good sport.
It's a good way to break a leg, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Good way to break a leg. Al never did it. Al
Good.
never did.
Whitney, we could go on for hours. If there are questions, this might be a good
We actually
time.
do have some questions that were called in, and then we'll take audience questions afterwards. But the first one is, were you all able to bring home any Inuit art?
Art?
Art.
Well, I bought some ivory things, cooking things.
Some utensils and
Made
knives.
made by the Eskimos. What I was wearing their art.
You were.
We were wearing their art.
That's lovely. Now, do you still have your utensils that you brought home? Wonderful.
I
What a
can't think
treasure.
of anything else.
Well, lots of memories and pictures also, I'm
Oh
sure.
yes, and if I could have brought my parky, but of course it's probably lying anyway. I don't know how we could have saved it. I wanted to, but
Well, I'm glad we got a sneak peek of it in one of the pictures. Another question is, what kind of language did they speak?
their own.
Yeah, their native language. And I had an interpreter for sermons. And I would say a few words, and then he would interpret that in the native language for the older people. And in fact, the school teachers asked the parents of little children to please use English with the children until they got to school so that they could understand the teachers. And then they could teach them the native language. The parents could.
Interesting. Now,
They
did you
were
pick up any
great-
of that language as
Great
well?
bunch of people. It was.
Not much, no.
Not much?
No.
Okay.
It wasn't written down.
Oh, wow. So just learned. Yep.
No, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you had a translator.
Yeah.
We just had another question come through. What kind of whale was it, and did you feel any remorse for killing it?
I think they called them bowhead whales.
The bowhead whale.
Yeah. No, I didn't feel any remorse. No.
How often did the town essentially go on whale hunts? Was that a frequent?
Whenever you spied one.
Just wasn't very often.
A
Just
few a year, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you told me that they use every bit of the whale.
Yeah.
Nothing is wasted.
Right.
And so it's really kind of a need. The hunt is determined by the need.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating that they give each piece, make sure everyone in the town gets to benefit from it.
Yeah,
That's quite a culture there.
Yeah, it is.
So now, does anybody in the audience have any questions? So Emily's going to come around with a microphone, and then she'll relay the question to me. And
Okay. How were the insects in the summer? Were they bad?
The insects?
Yes. Mosquitoes.
Insects?
Insects.
I never saw one. Did you?
No.
I think that maybe answers that. They never
That
saw
sounds
them.
great.
I don't think they were bad.
I mean, I never saw a rat or...
Lemmings.
Oh, lemmings. Oh, yes, lemmings. I think lemmings, they look like long rats. And they're supposed to be stupid. So I was nursing the baby in the kitchen, and it had snowed, and covered the windows of the kitchen. So I'm nursing away, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye in a window opposite me, and I thought, no, I didn't see anything move. But then I saw again, and lemmings were attracted by the light from the kitchen, so they began to run, made a tunnel, and and at first I thought I was dreaming, and they'd go, boom, boom, and finally I kind of got hysterical because I didn't know what it was. But they're supposed to be so stupid that they get to the edge of a cliff, they jump into the water and drown. But this was a pretty smart lemming because they were attracted by the light and they knew how to get to it. But what they did after they left my window, I don't know.
Well,
But it was just...
That reminds me of another aspect, which was we got the snow, and then the wind would come at different times and rearrange the snow into big drifts. And they'd be packed so hard that the local people would cut stairs in the drift to get over it.
In a drift.
That drift would be there the rest of the winter.
It's a lot of snow.
A clever way to deal with a snowdrift. All right, we have a
All
couple
right.
more
Were there
questions.
any polar bears in the area?
Yeah, I didn't see any live, but I remember one time somebody got one who was hunting, and what some of the local people did was stretch the skin.
Oh,
And
you mean blue bears?
yeah, polar bear skin.
Oh, to make them...
Well, they
Go on. I'm
lay it
sorry.
out, and they could stretch it a little bit because they sold it by the foot, and they'd sell it to anybody who wanted to buy it.
Smart.
How many people lived in that village?
Maybe 1,000, maybe fewer than that.
And there were little villages around the town that you went to.
Yeah, well, they weren't near.
Yeah, well, but they were all related.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, they were very nice people and
You got a
generous. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. How long did you all live there?
We were there for 3 years, and but I spent a summer there while I was still in seminary. afterwards, it was 3 years.
You want to tell
I
your
think we have
mother's story?
time for one more over here. Oh, okay.
All right, never mind.
Good story.
Okay, that was answered. All right. Any other questions in the audience? Oh, Mary Chester has one in the back.
No.
Did you have a garden in the spring or the summer, and where did you get vegetables?
We did not have a garden. There might have been some gardens, but most of our vegetables came in cans.
Oh, that's a nice preserved way.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this has been so enlightening. We really appreciate y'all sharing your stories with us, and I know there's going to be more questions as the time goes on, and as y'all pass them in the halls, please feel free to ask away. But we've really appreciated this, and then Joan's going to tell us about our next Who Knew, and we'll look forward to that in April.
Thank you, Whitney. The guest on the next live Who Knew on April the 21st is Anne Hobson Freeman. She's a well-known writer, and she now lives in the Courtyard. Anne is a Richmond native. She graduated from Bryn Mawr, studied at London University on a Fulbright, earned a master's degree in English from UVA, and actually taught creative writing at UVA for many years, about 15 years. In her early years, she was a reporter from Russia and Eastern Europe, and she has written short stories, poetry, and biographies. Her short stories and essays have appeared in national magazines and anthologies, including Best American Short Stories and prize-winning stories from Mademoiselle. You're in for a treat in the next live Who Knew as Ann Archer interviews Anne Hobson Freeman.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Yay!